So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War, and to another battle replay, and to a custom scenario actually, which in many ways bears the same sort of hallmarks that Spirit of Thunder's scenarios had over in Reforged, because this is a representation of a real-life battle which is going to be viewed through the lens of Silmarillion Total War, so that's going to be quite interesting. The battle in question is the Battle of Plataea, which was one of the battles in the wars between the Persians and the Greeks in, I think it was 479 BC when I was looking this up. Regardless, if you were curious about the actual battle itself, as well as some of the details in the real historical thing, then I would urge you to go and look that up. I believe Scouts of Entertainment is going to do this battle as well, and he'll probably focus a little bit more on that. As for me though, I will be focusing much more on the Silmarillion aspects of this battle and how it's going to play out in that way. When it comes to duplicates as well, for the most part I'm on the wrong side of them because I tend to record quite a long way in advance, so I would imagine that this battle has probably already been seen at this point. If not, great, it means this is the first time that it's been seen, but I don't hold my breath for that at all. Regardless, that being the case, I'm going to say that the best place, especially considering that there is sort of a dried up river that is running through this region, the best place that this would be on the actual map of Beleriand would probably be the GELION region, especially seeing as that's on sort of the eastern portion of Beleriand as well. So it would make sense, because I think the Persian representation today, the side that lost the real battle of course, is going to be made up of 4 armies of Easterlings. The Easterlings are... We'll go through this army first of all, actually, seeing as we're already over here and seeing as we're already talking about them. The Easterlings, in terms of their gameplay, for me, are my least favourite faction, even though stylistically they are one of my favourite factions to look at, because I think they're very aesthetically pleasing. But the complete lack of foot archers does make them a rather difficult faction to work around, at least for me. I feel as though it's... I do like the fact that Silmarillion has gone in for sort of really macro strengths and weaknesses rather than every faction having access to most tools, and a lot of factions end up feeling the same if you end up doing that. So I do quite like the way that Silmarillion has gone about its business, at least in that regard. However, the omission of foot archers outside of the legendary company that the Easterlings will be given is a very large gap in their roster, and personally I don't like it. Personally, it's not really for me. You can work around it and they can be effective, but personally I don't like it. I like having some foot archers. I like being aggressive, but I like doing so with a bit of support. And with the Easterlings, if you get your advances wrong because of the lack of range units, you can end up getting picked off and outmaneuvered in that way. So we'll see if that is the case for the Persian representation here on the field today. Tundra's Fox is going to be playing as one of the Easterling armies. And to be fair, infantry is not an area where the Easterlings struggle. They actually have it probably better than a few factions in the game as it stands, at least with regards to their ability to be both solid and to deal damage. Warband of Lothan are very basic as far as their units go. This is like the entry level Easterling unit. So they are militia effectively, although based on how Silmarillion is, even militia units like this are fairly impressive in terms of their style and in terms of what they're capable of. Big shield again. In terms of armour, less, especially compared to their higher Lothland brethren, or Lothlan brethren I should say, but still a very functional unit to have on the front line. And of course their spears, so they can hold the line decently well, as well as having that anti-cavalry bonus. They won't do a lot of damage to other infantry though, especially higher tier options from other factions. We have the Marauders of Himring, which are an axe-throwing unit combined with being a sort of rather basic unit of infantry as well. They definitely don't have the survivability as the Lothlan units that you can see just in behind, but they can look after themselves okay in melee. But of course the main event is the fact that they are axe throwers, so they will be able to do some damage first before joining the fray. And this is where the Easterlings are quite well stocked. They do have a few axe throwers in their repertoire, as well as horse archers, which is how you get your damage done at range. So if you do get your lines set, this is where the Easterlings can really clean up, because their axe throwers do a lot of base damage. Main issue though is that axe throwers don't tend to be armor piercing, which does mean that as long as the enemy are pointing towards you, heavily armoured and shielded units will be able to absorb quite a lot of the damage of axe throwers. And this is one way in which I would suggest the Easterlings need a bit of a tune-up. If you're going to completely omit having foot archers from an army, then you better make their hand-thrown projectiles damn good. And at the moment I do think the Easterlings axe throwers, while decent, do fall a little bit short of making up for the fact that they don't have archers entirely. Meanwhile, in behind, an area where they certainly don't fall behind other factions is in their central core. Their main Lothlan units, the Wardens of Lothland are heavy spears, very, very good at holding the line. The Easterlings are by no means a glass cannon faction. They do have some glass cannon elements, but the core of their army is very, very solid, and that is made up of the Lothland units here, the Wardens and the Clan Guard, who are of course the swords. The swords will probably be a little bit more useful when the going gets tough in a pit fight, because of course they can do a little bit more damage to enemy infantry with those sabres that they wield, whereas the Wardens of Lothland will be slightly better at holding the line, because that's just how spears are in medieval too. If you get them into formation, they will withstand one hell of a beating, but of course they will do less damage as well. So it really just depends on what situation you're in, which one is going to be better. We've got some Despoilers of Dor Coranthia, which are... They used to have a different name, I can't remember, I think it was the Pillagers of Himring, but now they're called the Despoilers of Dor Coranthia. They are the middle version, the sort of second tier of Falksmen that you have as the Easterlings. The two base Falksmen are not armor piercing, but they are of course very high base damage, very high charge as well, is what the Easterlings can do quite well. Shock infantry in Med 2, I would say that, you know, overall having high charge and infantry is nice, but it's no sort of replacement for having cavalry by any means. However, very good at dealing damage on the front line, the Despoilers, not quite as good as the Sons of Ulfang at this sort of thing, but you could make the argument, especially in a game where you have to pay for your armies and not a scenario, that they could even be more efficient than the Sons of Ulfang. But more on that later, perhaps when we talk about the Sons themselves. We also have some Halberdiers of Lothland back here, arguably one of the, well not arguably, I would say definitely one of the most useful units you have as the Easterlings. Phalanx units, spear wall units are not ubiquitous in Silmarillion by any means, and the Halberdiers are one way in which the Easterlings can take full advantage of that with an armor piercing unit as well. Very good at dealing damage potentially over a long period of time, especially if things get bogged down, but also good for shoring up the centre of your line alongside your other tanky Lothland units. Ravagers of Himring, they are the entry level Falks, so again relatively cheap, good amount of damage potentially, but also among your roster especially, they are really quite fragile, both in melee and at range, to be honest with you. So they are very much a flash in the pan type unit. If you use them wrong, if they get into a situation against archers, they will melt away very, very quickly, but they can be utilised to good effect. One thing that Falksmen do have in their favour as well is a bonus against cavalry, albeit, you know, if they get charged by cavalry, that doesn't really count for a whole lot, but if they can manage to sort of get in and amongst cavalry, that can be a very useful aspect of their army indeed. And then 2 units of the Sons of Ulfang, a really, really strong unit of shock infantry, a massive charge bonus on them as well, which does mean that among infantry they are capable of doing a lot of damage very, very quickly, and unlike the other Falksmen of the Easterlings, they are armor piercing, which is a big distinction. Armor piercing is a big deal for a unit like this. They aren't really a patch on something like the Sons of Húrin though, because the Sons of Ulfang, unfortunately for them, are only 1 HP, which makes a big difference in a bodyguard duel essentially. If you're going to have a lot of multiple HP bodyguards, one thing that I would say is that single HP bodyguards become much less impressive in comparison to them. I think it's an all or nothing type thing. If you intend the unit to be used as a bodyguard, you kind of need to give it a second hit point and maybe reduce the unit size a little bit. If they're intended to just be a high tier unit, that's fine, but if they're intended to be a bodyguard unit, stuff like the Sons of Ulfang and the Mythern and Tol Galen, especially when it comes to implementing them in campaign, will be, by comparison, somewhat disappointing. Talking about stuff like the Sons of Húrin, of course, they're one of the strongest units in the game at the moment, but if that's the company the Sons of Ulfang are meant to keep, then they do fall a little bit short of that, considering their price, I think. Having said that, in a scenario, that's not really a problem, because you get given your armies anyway, and they will be able to do a lot of damage on the front line against heavily armoured units. We will be going through the other 3 Easterling armies a little bit quicker than this, by the way, because doubtless they'll have fairly similar armies overall. They do have horse archers, which somewhat makes up for the fact that they don't have any sort of foot archers. The Eastron horsemen, of course, you just have to look at them to know that enemy foot archers will be able to deal with them relatively easily, because they are very, very vulnerable to ranged attacks. They don't really wear armour at all, but they are numerous and you can bring a lot of them. Gives you a good amount of mobility, but it is micro intensive, of course, especially if you're getting chased around by other cavalry. But if you are getting chased around by other cavalry, then this is your best tool for dealing with them. The Salamandrine Guard, really, really good at, you know, just, well, they're higher damage than the Eastron horse archers just in behind them, and also they have a bonus against stuff like cavalry and elephants in melee as well. I would say when it comes to dealing with elephants, to be honest with you, if that's their intended purpose, again, this is another unit I would say that needs a little bit of a boost in terms of being fit for that purpose. But they are very useful actually at dealing with enemy cavalry. If that is their primary purpose, then I'd say they're fine. But if they're intended to be like Balrog hunters, I think in melee they leave a little bit to be desired in those terms. And then back over here we also have some Easterling Horse Guard, so some units that are still in the files from over in 3rd Age Reforged. Normally the Easterlings do not have a unit of cavalry that wields a spear in melee, but today they do. I'm not entirely sure how balanced this is going to be, because Silmarillion and Reforged have got entirely different balanced priorities, but it does give them a bit of a boost in terms of their mobility. I don't imagine that would be too much of a problem, to be honest with you, because the Easterling Horse Guard are very ordinary cavalry by Reforged standards. Then over here we have J-Monster himself, good to see him play. He's got a couple of units of the Clan Guard of Lothland. He's got the Chieftain's Honour Guard. This is a unit which is fit for purpose when it comes to being a bodyguard unit, because it's an incredibly tanky unit of weapon and shield infantry of the bodyguard standard, multiple HP, all of the trimmings that you would want. There are units in this class, I would say, that are probably, well, not probably, but slightly better than this, stuff like the Iremo Arantar. But having said that, Chieftain's Honour Guard are very, very good at what they do, and they fit very nicely in with all of the Lothland units that you have elsewise. We do have some foot archers on display as well, the Easterling Hunters, the basic runic archer from over in Reforged. So this is one of those situations where under most normal circumstances you would not have these units as the Easterlings. This is your main weakness. But today the Easterling Hunters and the Veriag Mercenaries are on display, which is fair enough. They are going to be here, and we also have some Salamanders back here, the Salamandrine Guard, as the mighty Easterling encampment gets ready to empty itself across the GELION rivers. Marauders of Himring as well, so more throwing axes. On the front line we have some more Warband of Lothland, some Despoilers of Dor Caranthea, some Easterling Marauders. They're the lower tier of throwing axe unit, but they're a dedicated throwing axe unit, unlike the Marauders, completely designed for their throwing axes, but of course same problem as the Horse Archer version of that unit model, very, very weak to arrow fire. Ravagers of Himring, and finally more Sons of Ulfang. While I was sort of decrying the Sons of Ulfang a little bit in the last time, one thing that you can't deny is the fact they look superb. And then the 3rd Easterling army, we have Stewie. He has got some Easterling Hunters, he's got some Marauders of Himring, Ravagers of Himring, some Easterling Horsemen and Salamanders ready to get across that river and do some damage with their bows and fire arrows. Warband of Lothland, a lot more Lothland units as well, a very solid looking army this. They should be able to put up a fight against most anything. And some more Despoilers of Dor Caranthea and more Sons of Ulfang, so there's plenty of Falksmen on display today. And the final Easterling army is commanded by Wallywolf. He has got some Marauders of Himring, he's got some Clan Guard of Lothland, lots of Easterling Hunters. You will never see the Easterlings utilise all of these foot archers under normal circumstances. Ravagers of Himring as well. Got some more Sons of Ulfang, more Despoilers of Dor Caranthea, savage attack values but weak to arrow fire over on this side of things. Easterling Marauders, and then some more Easterling Horse Guard as well. Heading across to the other side of the river, we shall start off, and I have to say, taking a cursory glance over all of the defending factions today, they've chosen pretty much the 3 Elven factions that are best at holding a line, all for slightly different reasons, but we shall start off with Lord of the Fallen, who's playing as the House of Finarfin, probably the best at holding a line because of their pikes, which we'll get onto momentarily, I would assume. Defenders of Tal Athdin, though they are a very regular by Elven standard spear unit, but they're still going to be useful for holding the line against some of the basic Easterling things. Swordsmen of Tal Athdin have got that Roman thing going on where they can first throw a javelin that isn't armor piercing, but that's not really the most important thing against a few Easterling units, so you should still be able to get some decent units or get some decent use out of this unit. And then of course they're just regular swordsmen in melee, which is very nice. The Bridge Wards of Nargothrond are going to be a big problem for the Easterlings here. They're going to need to use axe throwers and their Salamandrine Guard and things like that on the Bridge Wards, because if they allow it to get into a ground war where it's all about their pikes and polearm units, then Finarfin beat everyone, all ends up in that regard. That is a huge amount of Bridge Wards as well. That is at least 4 units of Bridge Wards as well as some Wardens of Nargothrond, so it's all to do really for the Easterlings. We shall see if they are capable. Wardens of Nargothrond, lots of Wardens as well. I mean, this is the terrible duo of Finarfin, the Wardens of Nargothrond AP spears combined with Bridge Wards. They take quite a while to kill things under a few circumstances, but kill things they do. There's a certain inevitability about facing it down We shall see how the Easterlings go about their business. And finally, the Sator Finderato, which of course are a bodyguard unit. There is, I think that's Durin, isn't it? Is that just the general's the general unit now in general for Finarfin? Regardless, we then have a couple of units, I believe. Actually, no, this is the second Finarfin army, played by Artorius. He too has got some Swordsmen of Talathrin in. He has got some Stalkers of Tor and Faroth, some Bridge Wards. That he's all in a bit of a blob here, to be honest with you. So we shall have to wait and see on what happens here. I imagine they've just arrived from the road, so they may arrive a little bit later on. Wardens of Nargothrond, and then there is the next army, which is Fingolfin, played by Eclipse 2500. Some Herumatar of Barad-Ithel, a two-handed sword unit. They boost the effectiveness of nearby units as well in terms of morale and such. I think that's working now. There was a time, for the longest time really, where those effects did absolutely nothing. But now the Herumatar should be able to do that. So that's they also have a sword and shield version of that, which we might see. Marines of Vinyamar, so a javelin unit. Thirdsmen of Dorloman, a brilliantly well-rounded faction, to be honest with you. Fingolfin, there's not really anything they can't do effectively. Marines of Vinyamar as well. They also have pikes. They may not be on the same level as the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond, but the Sentries of Hithlum will still get the job done, and it still gives you a really, really effective line-holding unit as Fingolfin, especially if you back them up with some Elven line infantry. More Thirdsmen, more Sentries of Hithlum all along the back here. Some Herdsmen of Hithlum with their axes. Some more Herumatar, some more Bladesmen. The Irimo Arantar as well. The Guard of Fingolfin himself. Some Armatar of Barad-Ithel, some Bladesmen, and some Blade Masters. Interesting. No Sons of Hurin by the looks of things though. Some mercy for the Easterlings in one aspect at the very least. And finally, Lord of Belagost, who is going to be playing as the Elves of the Falas, the Falathrim, another good unit for holding the line, or another good faction for holding the line. Nobles of Balar, very, very good. They may not be pikes, they are two-handed spears, but as long as they're not facing off against a pike unit, that doesn't really matter, to be honest with you, because their quality is very high. They're very similar in many ways, actually, to the Fountain Guard, a unit they share the spear model with, albeit they're not armour-piercing, but they are just really, really good at holding the line. Several units of them. Again, 4 units. There's a ton of phalanx units on display here for the blue team. The Easterlings are going to have their work cut out for them to get through all of this, to be honest with you, especially if the rivers are held effectively. Spear Host of Brithombar, a very ordinary unit though by Elven standards, a light unit of spears. Decent at what they do, but they're not going to win any prizes among the company that they keep in Silmarillion Total War. The Foresters of Brithombar can hide, which makes them pretty good for catching enemy cavalry out as it tries to move around the flank. And then the Marines of Eglarest are spears with javelins in tow. And then finally up here we have some Orion Efdun, which are the only multiple HP unit the Falathrim have. Brutally effective spears. Very, very tough to wear down. And then some Marksmen of Balar, and finally some Scouts of Eglarest. So, a little bit extended that, but without further ado, let's begin. Not a particularly long battle this one, so I'd imagine it's going to be quick, it's going to be brutal. And one of two things is going to happen, I think, just as a result of that. Either the Easterlings are going to fall upon the blue team and their defences are going to crumble in the face of that, and they're not going to be able to get their front lines and their pikes all set up. Or, potentially, they do not get their pikes set up and the Easterlings wash over them, which would be a real problem for them, because then the Easterlings will be able to get in and amongst them and utilise stuff like their high damage Folksmen, the armour piercing on the Sons of Ulfang. Not that Finarfin have got too many issues with armour piercing either, considering the amount of Wardens of Nargothrond they have on display today. Going to need to utilise their cavalry to good effect as well, the Eastlings. That is an area where they have a bit of an advantage today. Only the Scouts of Eglarest from the Elves of the Falas can stop them from doing as they please. And I wouldn't be too worried about that, to be honest with you. I think the Salamandrine Guard would have the beating of them anyway. You'd hope so anyway, because that is pretty much the entire purpose behind the Salamanders. And speaking of which, Stewie is going to be moving forward. Very nice looking unit, the Salamandrine Guard. They also lower the morale of units they hit with their projectiles, with their flaming projectiles. It's more of, when you see your unit become shaken because one arrow hits them, you could be forgiven for thinking it's maybe a little bit over the top, but to be honest with you, it's very rare you'll actually see that cause a break among your units if the Salamanders start shooting at them, so I wouldn't worry too much about that if that was a concern that you held. The Falathrim also moving across here. Frame rate's a little bit choppy, which is a little bit concerning. The Brithombar units moving along fairly quickly. Brythonbar units are the lightest version of the infantry units that you have, as the Falathrim, the Eglarest units are sort of in between, and then you've got several denominations of Noldor units, but mainly the Balar units. The Iran Kialim nowhere to be seen on this occasion, as the Easterlings begin marching across the river that is at low tide. You'd be getting muddy boots if you were doing this in reality. Salamanders moving forward. I do wonder if there was a grace period. I would say if there was, that was probably a bit of a mistake, because to be honest with you, that would really blunt the effectiveness of the Easterling cavalry if they weren't allowed to use it right from the start, because then you can just wall up behind your pikes and absorb all of the pressure that you need to. So I do hope that wasn't the case. I think composition wise the elves already should win this battle, if I'm being brutally honest. You can see over there the scouts of Eglarest moving forward, the salamanders charging in. They're already shaken actually, which surprises me a little bit. They might be getting a bit of friendly fire on themselves, to be honest. Not entirely sure what the purpose behind that charge was. Didn't really do a whole lot of anything. Eastron horsemen moving forward, and they are going to be shooting into the backs of these scouts of Eglarest as they move forward. Not the most heavily armoured unit, to be fair, the scouts. They do have a shield, but only from the front. Yeah, these salamanders are probably bitten off far more than they can chew at this point. I would actually back them in a fight against the scouts of Eglarest under normal circumstances, but not with the positioning there. I think that was pretty poor, to be honest with you. But J-Monster is going to be moving forward quite rapidly with his infantry. If they can make the most of this, to be honest with you, while the defenders are still in transition, then it could be good news for the Easterlings as they start swarming through these ruins over here as well. Eastron Horse Guard, thinking of getting their spears down and charging in, but thinking better of it. And yeah, the problem with Finarfin is if you're trying to use cavalry on them, so many of their units are spears and pikes, or units that have bonus against cavalry, that they don't really have a weak spot to cavalry unless their whole army is pointing the wrong way. Meanwhile, these salamanders are really taking a lot of damage. 2 units of scouts of Eglarest swarming over them. I mean, they have been blobbed up, so they are taking damage. More salamanders are coming in now. You can see over there the Eastron horsemen also firing in as the front line is being formed. And I can hear as well the telltale sounds of throwing projectiles, marauders of Himring, doing some good damage there, shooting right in from the front. A lot of these guys will get back up, but they are softening up the front line, and they do need to cut down on the amount of quality that the elves are going to have on the front line here, as the bladesmen of Barad-Eithel do their best to mitigate that damage with their shields. This is going to be a bit of a chaotic one, to be honest with you, so it's been a while since I've had to employ the use of half speed, but we will do so here. But if the elves are wise, they will certainly be trying to use their ranged firepower to focus the Falksmen down. Even in melee, the Falksmen are more fragile, but they are also quite capable of dishing out extra damage. If the Easterlings are just reduced only to their Lothlin units being effective, that is a fight where they will, put up some resistance to the elves, but it's not one they'll outright win. The Easterlings are going to need the support of their axe throwers, their cavalry, and their Falksmen doing some damage in melee if they are to win. Heru-Matar of Barad-Eithel charging into this hapless unit of Warband. The second unit of Warband is being added, so in terms of sheer numbers, they probably will win that fight, but Heru-Matar will certainly take their pound of flesh out of the Easterlings there. Meanwhile, over on this side of the line, you can see a whole Easterling army is swinging out quite wide. Tundra's Fox is going to need to get a bit of a shimmy on here, to be honest with you, because J-Monster's army, as well as Stewie's army, will not last forever under the withering attention of a Finarfin army, a Falathrim army, and a Fingolfin army. So he's going to need to hit them from the side pretty quickly, and I think Belagost is recognising that. I think he sees that if we can get a lot onto the front line, try and wipe the Easterlings out from the front, or do crippling damage to them, it doesn't really matter what the Easterlings do from the flanking move if they arrive too late to be of much use. Herdsmen of Dorloman charging down the hill, getting involved actually with the Salamanders, which is not good for them. They do need to get out of here. We are viewing this at half speed, and we have the benefit of hindsight, of course, in a replay, but when it comes to cavalry like this, you need to keep them constantly moving, and moving away from units like the Foresters of Brythonbar, because they will be exactly the sort of unit that they're going to want in melee against these Eastron horsemen. Meanwhile, fighting in the ruins, perhaps, as Wally Wolf's Easterlings start taking up a position as well. I do think he needs to be trying to make the battle as wide as he can here, Wally Wolf. You really don't want to be getting involved again in a grindy, bogged down fight with Finarfin because they beat every other faction in the game in that kind of fight. There are some which could contest it, but the Easterlings are not really one of them. Falksmen, their primary vector for dealing damage, will be too easily held at arm's length by bridge wards, and their Lothlin units will also slowly but surely get worn down by the sheer amount of Wardens of Nargothrond that Lord of the Fallen is working with today. As J-Monster moves forward, he's getting his warband into place, but at this point Finarfin is arriving on this side to prevent any sort of flanking action. You can see on this front line as well, more throwing axes coming in, hitting into this mass of units, which includes Marines of Vinyamar and Herdsmen of Hithlum. I mean, Herdsmen of Hithlum will actually take a decent amount of damage at the hands of those axe throwers. Marines of Vinyamar are not the tankiest either, not dealing with that sort of thing anyway. Halberdiers coming in, they actually haven't taken any damage on the approach, so they're going to be able to get into melee relatively unscathed. Important unit to get on the front line as well, because this is something that can be utilised to start turning the tide against a part of the Fingolfin line that doesn't involve pikes. You can see over here these halberdiers from Stewie are going to have the attentions of some sentries of Hithlum upon them pretty quickly, but you can see over here, yeah, the Falathrim are pushing forward. Got J-Monster on the back foot here really, and still Tundra's Fox's army is not moving quickly enough. He needs to get all of his units moving. Too many of them are static. He needs to just be sprinting over here. Fatigue doesn't matter, organisation doesn't matter. At this point you either get over here pronto, or your allies' flank will be utterly destroyed. And then they will turn their full attention on you. Warriors of Eglarest, nice unit of line infantry. There's a few salamanders being attacked. Yeah, it's a decent amount of infantry. This, you can see some Easterling horsemen firing in. What are they firing at? Marines of Vinyamar. They are shielded from the front though, so they will withstand a lot of that. The Easterling horsemen, very much a harassment unit. And then forward come the nobles of Balar as well. If they can get onto the front line, it's looking pretty grim for the Easterlings over in the middle. Meanwhile, over on this side, things looking a little bit better perhaps. I like the look of the mini-map engagement, the fact that the red arrows are trying to envelop the blue. That implies that the Easterlings are going to try and surround them. Unfortunately, the Ravagers of Himring caught up on their own unit rather. This is one of the problems with expecting a unit of infantry to really be the primary vector for dealing charge damage in Med 2. The infantry charging is just a little bit off. It's one of those things in Med 2 which could do with some improvement. Med 2 is not a perfect game after all. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter what sort of number you give the infantry. Sometimes only the front ranks will charge, and sometimes charges are interrupted more easily. Yeah, bridge wards are here. There goes, I believe, either J-Monster or Stewie's General. Warden's taking a bit of damage there from the Marauders as we make our way through the ruins as well. This is what the Eastlings are trying to do. They're just throwing their Wardens, their warband of Lothlin under the bus, trying to get the bridge wards into an exposed position so that they can use their projectiles on them. A huge amount of throwing axes coming forward. The Stalkers will take a decent amount of damage actually at the hands of throwing axes such as that. Continuing to try and push from the flank. But it's with cavalry unfortunately. And again, cavalry is always going to find it quite difficult against House Finarfin. Yeah, and these strong Marauders now also being caught out in melee, but fully exposed for those Marauders of Himring to do their thing. The mini-map situation over here, it looks as though the red team are running over the elves, and to be fair, in some places they're doing really rather well for themselves. Artorius did deploy a little bit further back after all, and this has allowed the Falksmen to be in the vanguard, to do a bit of damage. The pikes have not really been able to get themselves set all that well. They should be able to recover that situation though. The Despoilers of Dor-Caranthir will also need a little bit of support here. Marines of Aglarest are also going to be firing their javelins into the fray. Sons of Ulfang over here, 62 of them, so they've been involved in some melee before, but surrounding the Wardens of Nargothrond, that should be a fight that goes the way of the Sons of Ulfang. Throwing axes in here as well. A very brutal fight this, as more axes get thrown. Stalkers of Torren Faroth. Again, one of the better targets for axe throws because of the amount of damage that you can do. Meanwhile, Tundra's Fox still hasn't arrived. I know that we're on half speed, but He really needs to get his infantry into position here at this point. Again, it's not really his fault, it's how the map is, but you can see as well on the front line, I mean, they're fighting evenly here. Like I said, the Lothlin units for the Easterlings are fighting evenly with the elves that they are facing off against. But how long can they really do that for, especially with Orion Ephedun coming into position, Marauders of Himring pulling out their primary weapons, which are one-handed Falxes. Going to be trying to do their thing there. Nobles of Balar as well, wherever they are. The Easterlings look like they're really struggling here in the middle, which was always going to be the case. It's whether they can hold on just in time for Tundra's main army to get around here and start doing their thing as well. Salamanders are over here. Over here as well, to be fair, with stuff like Sons of Ulfang and Despoilers of Dor-Caranthir, they have been pushing pretty hard against the Finarfin section of the line. Out of ammunition are the Eastron Marauders, so they're just going to add themselves to melee to keep this assault going for as long as possible. More throwing axes. Again, they don't have quite the same punch as javelins in this situation, but against pikes, not a bad idea. No shield value to blunt their damage. Just a hearty amount of armour, as House Finarfin are known for. Meanwhile, we can see here some Eastron Horse Guard clattering into the swordsmen of Talath Dirnin. Tundra's Fox right around the back over here. Eastron Horsemen as well. Ravagers of Himring fighting valiantly against the swordsmen of Talath Dirnin. Some Warriors of Lothlin are joining them in that pursuit as well. Meanwhile, in this sort of side fight in the ruins, again, it is a relatively even fight. The Eastlings have done what they can by getting in some decent positions. You can see there's some Eastron Horse Guard in the back lines as well. And they did charge into a unit that was moving, so the defenders of Talath Dirnin weren't entirely ready for that charge. But as soon as those Elven spears start getting responding to the cavalry, the Eastron Horse Guard will almost certainly buckle under that pressure, so they need to get out of there pretty quickly. But it is a bloody fight once again. I just think Finarfin, they tend to be able to outlast their opponents in this kind of situation. Having said that, that is a huge amount of throwing axes, doing some good damage there to the Stalkers of Tauren Faroth. And he still has a lot of Falksmen that he can commit to the fight as well. Despoilers of Dor-Caranthir. If they can get a good charge, who knows? Sons of Ulfang are ready to move in as well. And he also has his Eastron Hunters. They could probably do with getting into a better position, to be honest with you. Even if it's more exposed, I think the risk would probably be worth it. Ravagers of Himring clattering into the defenders of Talath Dirnin, who are probably the least suited for facing off against the Falksmen, to be honest, especially if they get a bit of support from a rear cavalry charge. The Easterling spears come down and they do get up to charge speed, but they don't really connect as well as maybe they could have done. I mean, decent amount of damage. It could have been even worse though for Finarfin potentially. Meanwhile, some Warband of Lothlin, Wardens of Lothlin there. Not looking good for them at this point. The Marauders of Himring should probably get onto the front line. You can see here the Sons of Ulfang being fought to a standstill. There just aren't enough of them. But again, it's pretty telling when 50 Sons of Ulfang cannot seem to defeat a similar number of Swordsmen of Talath Dirnin. Eastron Horsemen charging into the backs here of the Warns of Nargothrond. Pretty messy fight, to be fair. I just kind of doubt, in this situation, I kind of doubt the Easterlings have got the minerals to be able to withstand a fight like this against the kind of Elven factions they're having to go up against. Tundra's Fox has now arrived though, mounting an assault on these hills with his Lothlin units, going into the Nobles of Balar, suffering for it as well, but he has managed to get around the back with his Falksmen. Despoilers of Dor-Caranthir are in here, Salamandrine Guard are getting in and amongst the archers that are in behind enemy lines. Marksmen of Barad-Ithel, they will at least be stopped from shooting, which is extremely important because they need to make sure these Despoilers of Dor-Caranthir do not continue to get shot. Otherwise it doesn't matter how many of these Falksmen you have. Oh, there goes the Fingolfin General. The Irimo Arantar have been involved in the fight this whole time. I wonder if we can find what remains of them. This is looking fairly promising for a place where they were. Well, there is a Son of Hurin in there, but it's an officer model. Well, they would give some Sons of Hurin now, I'm sure. 28 Sons of Ulfang. Yeah, you can see here that this is where the Eastlings were going to struggle. In a straight-up line battle, all three of the Elven factions they were going to face off against today had the units to win that engagement, but where they've been wrapping around, the Easterlings have actually been doing okay for themselves. I just don't know if they're going to be able to carry that through to victory. Now the Sons of Ulfang are doing some good damage. When the fight had time to settle down, they did the business. Eastron Hunters shooting up the line of the Finarfin ranks. I don't know if Eastron Hunters are going to have the damage dealing capabilities, to be honest with you, to kill them off quickly enough to save the poor Lothlin units on the front, but it's better than doing nothing. They are contributing. Clan Guard of Lothlin, a bit of an Easterling victory there. So yeah, the Easterlings are going to have some victories against Finarfin, but I think where Fingolfin and the Falas were concerned, I think that's going to be an elf victory, to be sure. Sons of Ulfang moving in. Can Wollywolf also be victorious against a Finarfin host? Always going to be difficult when you're facing off against 4 Bridge Wards of Nargothrond, 4 Wardens of Nargothrond, and some Sator Findarato. But he's done pretty well for himself over here, I have to say. Still, these Ravagers doing a good job, fighting hard on the front line, but again, more Nargothrond units. The Bridge Wards are here. There's more defenders of Talath Dionin as well. And what can you do in this situation? Try and shoot them, I suppose, with the Eastron Hunters wouldn't be the worst idea, but they're going after a target they have a very clear shot on. They may only be basic spears, but you're going to be able to get the most kills firing into them, I suppose. There goes another Easterling general. J-Monsters, I believe that was where his Sons of Ulfang were. Sator Findarato still fighting hard on the front line as well. Despoilers of Dor Caranthia still yet to be committed, actually, with another unit of Sons of Ulfang, so when they get involved, again, it's just a matter of holding the line here. You can see here all of the red arrows moving to envelop the Elven defensive position. It has been a pretty good fight, this, back and forth. Can the Falksmen do the business, though? Raining down blows upon the Marksmen of Balar. There's some Spear Host of Brithombar in there as well, who will actually do really poorly against the Falksmen. But once again, another Phalanx unit, the Nobles of Balar coming in. A real problem for these Easterlings. A few throwing axes coming in there from some Marauders of Himri. Down here, again, Nobles of Balar, they're shaken actually, so I think what I said has come to pass. The Lothlin units can hold their own. They can definitely give the Elves a good fight, but when push comes to shove, the Easterlings still need their axe throwers, their horse archers, and their Falksmen to make up the difference that there still is. And I'm not sure whether they've been able to do that enough, the Easterlings. There's still those foot archers trying to do their best. Orion Efdun, or Ethadun, fighting alongside some Bladesmen of Barad-Ithel and some of their own Spear Host of Brithombar. And the Clan Guard of Lothlin will ultimately fall. You can see here some Herdsmen of Hithlum as well as some Sentries of the same place, pushing forward with some Bladesmen, trying to go after some very depleted Eastron Horsemen. Pulling out their axes now, the Variag Mercenaries, and they will have to get into melee. It's looking pretty good for the Elves at this point. I think they're going to be able to reform their lines so that Eastlings won't be able to take advantage fully of the victory they had over here, and they're looking fairly thin on the ground at this stage. Some Ravagers of Himring which are going to be caught off balance a little bit by some Stalkers. Vanguard of Lothlin over here. Yeah, the Artorias is moving to surround what remains of Stewie's army. And you know it's bad when you're reliant on Eastron Hunters in melee, so I think the Easterlings are running out of steam here, unfortunately for them. Bridge Wards from Nargothrond are going to march into place as well. The fact that there's still so many of them is a bad sign. Late game pikes. A sign that somewhere things have either gone horribly wrong or horribly right, depending on which side of the engagement you're on. Swordsmen of Talath Dionin moving through, which is a sign that Easterling lines are also buckling over here. So the Easterling efforts seem to be collapsing at the same time all across the field. Yeah, and Eastron Hunters are not going to be up to the standard of Swordsmen of Talath Dionin. Vanguard of Lothlin are fighting. I say that. They did have a little victory over here, and they are going to be able to get in behind the line with a unit of Despoilers of Dorcaranthia. Once again, though, I think this is just going to serve to inflict some more damage on Finarfin, but not ultimately be enough to turn this entire fight around, either for Wally Wolf or for the Easterlings as a whole. But I suppose we shall just have to wait and see on that front. Still some ammunition in these Easterling Hunters, surely not that much more now. It's looking pretty bad over here. The Falathrim still looking reasonably healthy. It looks as though they are now facing off, well, I was going to say alone, but there are still a few Fingolfin units left. Fingolfin seem to have taken a bit of a beating. I think the Falathrim are probably the healthiest unit left on the field. And there goes the General of Tundra. He was just over here. And the Sons of Ulfang, yeah, this is the problem. The Sons of Ulfang, nasty AP damage that they can do, but they're being held at arm's length by the phalanx of the Nobles of Balar. There goes another Easterling General. Wally Wolf's in and amongst the ruins, facing off against Finarfin on the other side of the battlefield, trying to sneak through the lines here. Armitar of Barad-Ithel running away, actually. Marauders of Himring getting in here as well. Now actually able to surround a portion of the Falathrim army, but it's going to be too late, I fear. Some Warband of Lothlin doing their thing. Victory seems certain. Yeah, it was always going to be tough, I think, this one for the Easterlings, and they did pretty well. I think it was just a case of to have any hope, they needed to hit the elves all at the same time when they were kind of out of their shape. So I think J-Monster and Stewie actually did the right thing by attacking when they had the chance, when the elves weren't fully in position yet. Because if they didn't, if they just waited for the elves to get into place, then you're just going to throw yourself against an elven phalanx and die like dogs. But in so doing, of course, they made it so that Tundra was lagging behind fairly far away, and then it's always going to take quite a while before he arrived. And now what's left of Artorias' Finarfin army is also going to be able to get over here as well. Meanwhile, in and amongst the ruins, defenders of Talath Dianin, compensating for the fact that the Despoilers of Dorcaranthia were momentarily hammer and anviling, but now the front line has merely been reset, and the Easterling efforts will all be for naught. Sons of Ulfang still fighting well on the front line. They should do quite well against Wardens of Nargothrond. I would expect the Sons of Ulfang to be able to win that engagement, to be honest with you. If they can, again, it's just another pointer to me that the Sons of Ulfang, for what they are, need to be a little bit more of a special unit, I think. As of right now, they blend in a bit too much for me. Granted, my sample size of battles is a little smaller, but when you look at the equivalent units from elsewhere, I just think they need a little bit more spice. The charge bonus of 38 looks fantastic, but like I said, for infantry in Med 2, it's nice, but it's not amazing. Just because of the way infantry tends to work and be. Nobles of Balar, they're going to be able to absolutely butcher their way through these Easterling Hunters as they try and force their way through. What have we here? Some Salamanders. They've been caught by some defenders of Talath Dianin, which is no good for them. More pikes arriving. Eastlings are probably sick of the sight of all of these pointy sticks at this point. All three of the units are here. The Sentries of Hithlin, the Bridgewards of Nargothrond, and the Nobles of Balar, all surrounding what remains of Tundra's army, the Marauders of Himring, or Himring I should say, fighting to the bitter end. Not a particularly tanky unit though in the grand scheme of things. And they will run. Some Ravagers still alive. What remains of some warband over here from J-Monster also fighting to the bitter end. Reasonably resilient for what they are. Sator Finderato moving forward as well. I think that may very well be this army over here. Yeah, it's Wally Wolf's army. Breaks, the Sons of Ulfang fighting to the death. And his army is leaving the premises from the ruins, and then over here I think Tundra is going to be the last one. No, actually J-Monster is going to be the last one, I think. I think this is indeed the last unit. Well, there goes the warband. Perhaps not. Or is Wally Wolf still here? I guess the battle won't end until his fighting to the death units have been utterly vanquished. And there we go. Comprehensive victory. So it does follow what happened in real life then. The Greeks represented by the elves, victorious against the Persians, represented by the Easterlings. Highest kill count was by one of the Finarfin armies. Hard to tell which one that was. I would imagine it's probably Lord of the Fallen, actually, purely because he was facing off against one army exclusively, and 2,300 matches up quite neatly with the amount of units killed in battle that one of the Easterling armies would have. Actually, no, that's Fingolfin, isn't it? So Fingolfin actually got slightly more, but it's all much of a muchness, really. Artorias probably got slightly less because they were effectively 3v2ing two Easterling armies on the front for a little while. And he was there in support of that. And to be fair, he was having to go up against a lot of the more damaging units as well. Stuff like Sons of Ulfang, which can give as good as they get against stuff like the Nargothrond units, as long as it's not the pikes from the front. And the Easterlings, very even all around in terms of the kills that they were able to score. It is what it is. In the end, it was always going to be tough for the Easterlings, and it was meant to be, I guess, seeing as this battle in real life did end in a defeat for the side that they were representing. So it should be quite difficult for the Easterlings to win, given that that is the case. Let's see what did the damage for the Falathrim army then. Nobles of Balar, mixed fortunes in terms of kills. I mean, when you've got 4 units of Nobles of Balar, you'd expect them to do quite well, but 214 is very impressive, 57 slightly less so. The Orion Ephedune are not really a killing unit, they're just there to stay alive and hold the line, as most high tier spears tend to be. But even so, for a bodyguard unit, you would often expect them to get over 100 at least. 81 is fairly average, I suppose. Spear Host of Brithombar, very basic unit by the Falathrim standards. 311, yeah, very good performances by the Marksmen of Balar. If you target down the squishier portions of the Easterling army, then yeah, you're going to rack up a fairly good kill count with your archers, and yeah, they must have done that. I mean, definitely the right thing to be targeting down are their axe throwers and their falksmen, because like I said, as good as their Lothlin units are and they can put up a fight against an Elven front line, they need the support of their axe throwers, their horse archers and their falksmen in order to make it an even playing field, or even one in the Easterlings' favour. But yeah, big thank you to someone who sent this to me. I can't remember who it was that sent it to me, actually. It wasn't Belagost, I know that. I don't think it was Belagost anyway, unless he was running under a different name for the Discord in which these battles are being organised and run. But regardless, big thank you to all who were involved. Big thank you to whoever made the map. I think the idea for this thing in general was Belagost's. I'm not sure if he made the map. He might have done. If that's the case, then more credit. But whoever made the map, big thank you. Very, very fun to watch that, actually. So yeah, this one probably it's coming out at some point in December. This one, it may have already been shown on the channel of Scouts of Entertainment. Not sure. But yeah, I've just sort of resigned myself at this point to, if people are going to send out replays to absolutely everyone who covers Third Age content at this point, I'm going to be among the last to cover it, just because I've recorded in advance at this point to try and fit things around my actual life better. And yeah, obviously that means that I'm going to be coming out last in those particular races more often than not. But yeah, next up after this one is probably going to be an Osgiliath siege on Reforged, if I'm recalling correctly. Possibly. Anyway, regardless of that, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.